So good day, I'm Andrea Carugati here from the Aarhus School of Business and Social Sciences. We're sitting here today with a special guest, is Robert Austin from Copenhagen Business School, and we are going to talk about the future of hiring and human resource management within the IT world. Welcome, Robert.
Thank you. It's great to be here. Delightful to be here. Yep.
So let's start this discussion by talking about what is your view on the state of IT management today.
My view on the state of IT management. Well, I mean, we've never been better at it in some ways, right? I mean, the technologies continue to move rapidly. About every few years, we get a paradigm shift. So we've seen over the last 20 years or so, we've seen things go from mainframe to client server to internet to now cloud. So it's a never-ending source of challenges as we kind of shift the infrastructure and shift the basis of how we use IT to create value and to compete.
That sounds very interesting and very exciting for us as researchers in the IS world. So that is likely also to put new requirements on the human resources that we have in the IT function.
Yes, I think that's quite likely. We have always struggled in IT, I think, to have the skills and competencies to keep up with the moves. I remember when I started my career, it was important that you knew how to program in COBOL. Still important in some places. I think there's a large installed base of COBOL still, scandalously large probably in some companies. But of course the scarce skills and talents that we need now are no longer COBOL. They've moved on to lots of other things. According to some studies, there are hundreds of thousands of open positions, or will be within the next few years in the IT field. So we have a scarcity problem. We have a mismatch. A lot of the scarcity problem is due to a mismatch between the skills and talents that people have and what's increasingly needed by the evolving challenges of the IT field.
Yeah, and this I think is confirmed also from the European Commission with their studies on lack of IT talents. So let's go to the core of this interview, which is your most recent research on the Dandelion Principle. And tell us a little bit about that, and how is that contributing to maybe solve part of the problem or come up with a solution to this problem of talent?
Well, I think at its base, the idea behind the Dandelion Principle is that we should not leave any talent untapped, or at least we could do as well as we can by tapping into new sources of talent. So talent, skill bases that we haven't previously been able to access. The Dandelion idea started itself to address a social problem, a group of people with autism who generally are not participating in the workforce, or if they're participating in the workforce, they're generally underemployed relative to what they're capable of. So this started as a mission by a gentleman, a social entrepreneur named Torkel Sona. His third son was born and diagnosed with autism, and he had an unusual reaction to it. He mortgaged his house and started a company to employ people with autism, largely motivated by the idea that he wanted his son to have a job when he grew up. And he had also noticed that his son, in addition to his disabilities, had very considerable abilities, analytical abilities. He was capable of reproducing very complex things from memory. And so Torkel noticed that there were some skills and talents that his son had, even at age 7, that would be very useful, say, in software testing. So this started as an initiative to employ people with autism in the area of software testing, because there was a nice fit between the fact that people with autism often are comforted by repetition and routine that most people wouldn't be able to maintain. They can't keep their attention on repetitive tasks. But they're also very analytical and able to see patterns that other people can't see. So it was the real leap of insight was that there's this group of people that we haven't traditionally employed at all, and it turns out that they're really good at something we need done in the IT world.
Let me interrupt you for a second here. And you seem to talk about this Dandelion Principle as something good, while we are used to the dandelion as a weed. can you elaborate a little bit? Is Torkil Sonne referring to the employees in his company as weeds?
In a way, he is. Yeah, that's exactly that's the provocative metaphor that he's chosen. So everybody knows the dandelion. It's this yellow flower that gets into your green lawn. And what Torkil points out is that the dandelion is actually a really valuable plant. That if you look at the properties of the plant, the leaves are very nutritious to eat. You can extract all kinds of nutritional value. You can make wine from it. You can make coffee from it. And there are researchers in Canada who even believe that there may be treatments for cancer in the roots of the dandelion. So it's a very valuable plant. The question is, why do people consider it weeds? And the reason is because it's where it's not supposed to be. It's in a green lawn that's supposed to be uniformly green. So Torkil draws the analogy to our organization charts with their standard slots. He says that his people are not weeds. They are inherently valuable. The problem is, just like the dandelion in your green lawn, we tend to put them in contexts where we can't appreciate them, where they're weeds and not valuable plants. So, of course, the extension is let's stop doing that, right? Let's treat them differently.
So this is a modern story of the ugly duckling?
Yes, I think it is a modern story of the ugly duckling, but it also says that we need to think differently about the way we create our organizations and specifically job roles within our organization, because it means we need to kind of recreate the context that people work in to allow them to contribute to the maximum of their abilities. And by the way, the power of this idea is that it applies to more than just people with autism. The tech field is full of people who have eccentricities, but also great talent. The Dandelion Principle in its simplest form says, create the conditions in which your employees can create their maximum value.
Okay, so you're talking about this not as a corporate social responsibility activity. You're actually talking about real value creation. Can you point at different form of value creation from having employees with neurodiversities of different kinds?
Absolutely, and you're absolutely right about that. This is not just a sort of corporate charity. This is very important. This is important to Torkil from the beginning. He created a for-profit company, and he wanted people to hire his company because they were good, not because they needed help. But this persists, and so, for example, in companies like SAP, Hewlett-Packard, they all have the expectations that these programs that hire people with autism will pay for themselves in positive net benefit. They're not just CSR programs. So the kinds of benefits they're looking for, the biggest one that they talk about is an increased capacity to innovate that arises from people with different kinds of brains thinking about some of the same kinds of problems. So if you're a big company like HP or SAP, it's hard to innovate because everybody's kind of moving in the same direction, and it's hard to coordinate everything. You need everything to scale, which makes you tend towards doing things in standard ways. But innovation requires that you shatter the standards, that you break out of them, and that you come up with something new. So innovation's a big one. Also, mentioned this before, scarcity of talent. So if there's a job opening that would have gone unfilled, but now that we approach things differently and we expand the base of people we hire from, maybe we can fill positions. Maybe we can fill them with people even more talented.
You said this now that we hire differently. Many of people that don't fit into our green lawn, they will not go through a normal hiring process, a normal interview process. Can you elaborate a little bit on the concept of hiring differently?
Yeah, no, that's absolutely a key observation. It is true that most people with autism, and this could be applied to other conditions as well, like social anxiety disorders, they simply don't interview well. So if we do things in our standard hiring ways, where we have a checklist and we have items on the checklist like makes good eye contact. Well, often people with autism don't make good eye contact. They don't do a good job of presenting their own best skills and features. So What we're seeing at companies like SAP, Hewlett-Packard, Microsoft, is we're seeing them adapt hiring processes, change their HR processes so that they don't depend on things that really don't matter to doing the job. So maybe taking that thing off the checklist that says makes good eye contact, or at least making it so that if they happen to be, if they've got 2 electrical engineering degrees or 2 master's degrees, one in electrical engineering, one in computer science, and they've got a patent, but seem to have trouble making good eye contact, maybe the talents are more important than the eye contact. Yes. So we just have to modify our scalable hiring procedures to make that possible.
You mentioned briefly that other companies, you mentioned SAP and HP, are moving into this new type of hiring. Can you tell us a little bit what are their current strategies for addressing this?
Yeah, they vary. So, and I would say SAP and HP are the biggest companies that are, the farthest in front. SAP started their program in May of 2013. They made an announcement that 1% of their workforce will be people with autism by the year 2020. So that's probably 1,000 or so by then. SAP has deployed people from their program, which now numbers more than 100 people that they've brought on board. They're placing them in a wide variety of roles. So they started with software testing, but now it's broadened out to cybersecurity, business analytics, even HR and consumer support or customer support.
Okay. Customer support, seems a bit odd for a program like this. That points at the fact that maybe even within the neurodiversity, there is a wide diversity. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, that's absolutely true. And this is one of the things that when we did our interviews at SAP, they reminded us is that just like every individual without autism is an individual, so are there lots of variations in people with autism. And while the condition is generally characterized by difficulty with making social contact or having difficulty with communication and social interaction, there are exceptions to that. And SAP has one guy who's quite popular with clients, who's quite good at social interaction.
This is fantastic. And the fact that we are now talking about companies that are in the IT world makes me think that maybe the fact that we are talking about technology makes a difference.
Yeah.
Any thoughts about that?
Yeah, I think that's right. So one of the things, and this begins to help us kind of broaden the idea, the observation that there is this mythos in the technology world of the nerd or the geek or the guy who sits at his computer all day but doesn't do so well in groups. Well, this is not a perfect overlap with people on the autism spectrum, but this does begin to explain how technology makes some of these kinds of things possible, bringing this talent into the workforce. Many people who may have trouble in traditional social settings are much better if the mode of interaction is somehow technologically mediated. That is one of the things we're observing. And so in the tech field for 20, 30 years, we've had people who have what we might call inspired peculiarities, who like computers maybe more than they like people, right? Or that's the way we might have said it. So yes, I think that technology is having a strong impact on this.
So technology is both where people with neurodiversity can contribute as actually output of their work, but is also enabling their participation in the workforce because they interacted through technology. And that's maybe the case with the customer service person.
Yeah, well, I think he's probably an exception, right? Because he does like to talk to customers and they like to talk to him. But generally speaking, there are one of the people who I talked to about business analytics who has an employee from a program like this. He also points out that the skill overlaps are quite considerable, that people with autism are very good analytically sometimes, even if they're not very good socially. And what he said to me is it's a whole lot easier to take someone who has deep analytical skills and teach them a little bit about social interaction than it is to take some with superb social skills and teach them, sort of deep analytical skills. So these companies are finding it to be a good trade.
Yeah. And what is the reaction from the colleagues of people with these diversities?
Well, they all get training before they're introduced. This is true at SAP, HP, Microsoft, everywhere. And one of the reasons this is happening similarly in a lot of companies is because a Danish company called Specialisterne pioneered all these approaches. So they've developed the training programs. So it doesn't happen cold. The people in the organizations where people with autism on the spectrum are introduced have had training about what to expect. But generally speaking, it goes quite well. People like to be a part of the program. There have been some points of friction. One of the things that is often a characteristic of people who are on the autism spectrum is that they are very, very blunt in communication style. They don't understand nuance or irony or diplomacy in communication, so they will simply tell you their honest opinion, and that can come across sometimes as provocative or even rude. So there have been a few instances that I've heard about where social interactions kind of ran off the rails. Another thing is many of these folks need some kind of accommodation. So I heard a story about, when I was doing interviews, I heard a story about how there was one employee who needed to be isolated from noise, and so they put him in an office by himself. And then people from an adjoining department didn't like the fact that he had his own office when 3 of them had to share an office, right? So there are things like this, but these are manageable.
These are, so they are definitely manageable. And the programs like these, whether organizations do it for profit or for a certain social engagement, they do have an impact on society. We are talking about people that are out of the social help welfare system and get into the workforce. How do you see that process happening?
Well, this is, I think, one of the most compelling features of these programs is, one of the problems, this is kind of, business strategy theory, right? That a company not only has to be able to create value, it needs to be able to capture the value and monetize it. Well, one of the things that's clear with these programs is that they create a lot of value that doesn't get captured by the companies, but instead spills over into society. So as you said, great example, when someone that's been on public assistance or might be on public assistance their whole life moves into a tech company and starts to earn a tech company salary and being a taxpayer, then there's a considerable benefit to the society, just in monetary terms, right? So just to kind of take some speculative numbers that I heard talked about in the UK, that if it costs £29,000, £30,000 in the UK per person per year to keep someone in an institution well-fed, well-cared for, and so forth, and then we can convert them into a tech worker that's making, say, £45,000 per year, and being taxed at a 35 to 40% rate, the swing for the government is on the order of tens of thousands of pounds, right? So one of the discussions in this whole field has been how can governments encourage companies to create this value, and how can governments create policies that allow the companies to capture more of the spillover value?
Yeah, this sounds extremely interesting for companies, and then I'm thinking it must have a big impact on the self-respect that individuals have when they go from being helped to being part of the production system in a sense.
Yeah, it's really one of the most gratifying elements of these programs is to hear people who have gone from being unemployed or underemployed and having self-esteem issues related to that, feeling that they can't contribute, to see them transformed into someone who really knows that he or she is contributing in a major way. Extremely important to the families. Right? So that's another spillover benefit, if you like, that the companies aren't capturing, and maybe one that the governments aren't even capturing. But in terms of, I like to call it the mom factor, right? Your mother, right? So when I first wrote the case in 2008 about Specialist Sterna, co-wrote it. We closed the case with an email that a mother had sent to Torkel Sona. And it said, "Dear Mr. Sona, you don't know me, but I am crying right now." And she said, "I am crying because my son has just joined your company and he is happy for the first time since he started school." So it's difficult to measure those benefits, but it would be impossible really to ignore the importance of those benefits.
This is fantastic. And so this seems like the goose with the golden eggs. So individuals are happy, companies are happy, families are happy, societies are happy. Where do you see this going? As you're doing this project, you're moving forward. What's the next step? What are the next 3 steps?
Yeah, well, there was a big event in April of last year at the United Nations called Employment, the Autism Advantage. And so I think what happened there is the Secretary General of the UN called on companies to start programs like this, and Microsoft announced 2 days later that they would be moving into this area very aggressively. So it's going to spread to more companies. That's one answer. The other thing is, I think it's having an effect more generally on how we think about managing talent. And we've kind of already gone this route in a lot of tech companies, that we've always had employees that are very high contributors, but also kind of eccentric or idiosyncratic, that we've made accommodations for in order to benefit from their talents. So I think it's going to kind of turn on its head the way we think about human resources. We're going to start to think about people in much more individual terms and ask ourselves that dandelion question, how can we adjust the context of work and enable people to create more value, as opposed to saying, how can we get people to slot themselves into uniform slots in the organization, the more traditional approach.
That's a much larger implication than simply moving the yellow flower together with the yellow flowers. Here we're talking about changing the entire green space.
No, that's right. It kind of means the green lawn's not everything we thought it was, right? We should get used to maybe having more variety in our lawns. I think that's right. And I think that, one of the things that the innovation literature clearly shows is that innovations often come from the periphery, not from far, far away, but not from the center either. And so, there's a general issue that has to do with how do we, in an organization that's emphasized coordination, efficiency, economies of scale, which means everybody needs to fit together kind of frictionlessly, how do we also create a capacity for creating things that don't fit in, that are on the periphery, because that's where innovation comes from. So I think we're going to see companies adjust their HR processes, and we've been talking about some quite practical ways, that hiring processes and the like. But generally speaking, I think leaders are going to need to change the way they think. Some of them already think this way. There's a guy at SAP who has 500 employees who makes it his business to know every single one of them by on his drive-in to work. His drive-in to work takes about 45 minutes, and he has 1 employee per day who he calls. His assistant sets these up. He finds out what these people are about, what they think the company needs to do, how the company's doing, and so on. This is a very individual approach to management. It's harder on the leaders, I think.
Yes. But this is a very powerful message for the leaders of today. So on this comment, I think it's time to close this interview. It's been very exciting. Thank you, Robert, for being with us. And that's the end of the interview.